Yeah.
We're on? Okay. Great. Okay, fine. We'll just, as soon as they come in, just let me know. Oh, we started. Oh. Okay, well, my name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to welcome everybody here for our dialogue with LaRouche. That we have, of course, a different setup here today, and there are two chairs reserved for those with questions near the microphone. There's a general sort of meltdown going on in the American electoral process, which we're not going to spend any words on. If Mr. LaRouche wants to, he's perfectly happy to do it. We would also ask those of you in the audience that might be concerned about that to refrain from talking about that and try thinking about the broader implications of what we're actually faced with worldwide. So Lynn, if you would like to give us some opening remarks, and then we'll go right to the Q&A.
Right. Well, what is happening that we have moved some of our action from Manhattan, not to take it away from Manhattan, but in order to bring a broader representation of what Manhattan is saying to the world.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so we need to go, we're going to start right away with questions. So if we can have the first person.
This is Al Corby from New Jersey. How can we impress on Congress the reality of what's happening now on the borders of Russia? There could be just an accidental push of a button, or it could be a purposeful one by an insane leader in this country. The response from that would lead to a total world war, a total destruction of the planet. Could lead to the destruction of that congressman's own house. He can no longer watch it from afar. He would be totally involved in it too.
I don't think that problem is of that dimension in this quarter. The point is that internationally, there's an international resonance about what the kinds of things that we are speaking in terms of Manhattan. And I spend a lot of effort and concentration on exactly that. I have several responsibilities now internationally. And one of them is to make sure that the Manhattan organization, which is a leading influence and body for the United States, that body be heard and represented and duly informed.
Next. Okay.
Hello, Lynn. I have a report and then a question. So the report is that we've been having a very explosive response from people in the organizing this week, both in areas like the Bronx and in Greater Manhattan. And it's been around the whole fight to get out of NATO and to mobilize the American people to even know there's a danger of war. Such that we had, for example, long lines of people stopping at a table where we had 5 organizers. And even that wasn't enough to talk to everybody. So you would have people standing around, listening to the discussion. You would have, all kinds of people that didn't even understand English because they saw the signs on jailing Obama, and they were provoked to say, what's going on here? The same thing happened in Manhattan. We had at least 80 signatures, and because we had a microphone, for example, one of our organizers, Chris, was able to create a debate on this World War III danger, and this really provoked a lot of response from the population to come up and challenge him. And of course he had the mic, so he was able to have the last word. And so the population around was responding to that. The other thing is we had a lot of young people come up, young people who were in the military, were wondering about the drug situation because they saw some of our signs around how the increase of the drug has to do not with the breakdown of the economy, but also obviously the war situation. And then we also had at the rally in Greater Manhattan, we had a singing crew, and this totally got more people to come around and respond. The question is, this petition is obviously mobilizing a lot of people, and that's good. But what we want to know is it viable for a NATO country to follow our demands, to actually leave NATO before the Warsaw Pact happens? And for example, one case is de Gaulle. He pulled his troops out of NATO at one point, so we wanted to just get a response on that.
I would say that we have to take a responsibility for what the people of the United States can and will do. That's the primary consideration. The question then becomes, how will people in other nations of the world also respond to that kind of response? In other words, when people in the United States express and reveal what their views are on the issues facing the United States and beyond, that is what is important for us, is to get a picture of what the American citizen is doing and what the American citizen is doing by the way of thinking and what decisions are being made. Now, you know that Manhattan has a history when the British and the Saudis perpetrated murder, mass murder of the citizens of Manhattan. And I should say that that fact is sufficient to condemn those who continue to tolerate what the crimes committed by the president at that time and by the Saudis and British.
Yeah, and I'll just say that we are getting a bigger response on the British. More people know now about the British role in the war drive, so that's good.
Good, thank you.
Okay, next.
In terms of the effect of the 9/11 attack, you might be interested in just knowing that the other day a workman came into our office in Hackensack, Bogota, New Jersey. He actually came to collect a bill, and he was hanging around in the open area, and he heard me making a phone call on the phone with somebody, and he became totally engaged in the listening. He had to sit there and listen, and he became totally engaged just listening to the conversation, and turned to Diane and said, "Who is that person in the next room having this conversation about what's going on in the world?" And Diane mentioned that we were organizing this memorial to the people who died on 9/11, and he said, 6 of my cousins died in the attack on the World Trade Center. And he asked us to contact his wife. I mean, this is the kind of thing that just happens every hour of the day, you know, when you're actually talking to people in this New York, New Jersey area. In that light, there's no question that we're looking worldwide at a collapse of institutional traditions and institutional forms. And we were reminiscing this morning that June 21st happens to be the 50th anniversary of when de Gaulle left NATO. And 2 days later in England, they're going to be voting on this Brexit, which undoubtedly will be getting a lot of attention in the United States. But just generally, could you say something more about this question of institutional collapses and the way that the crumbling of institutions actually opens up people's capacity to respond more intelligently to the options that we're presenting?
Good. That's excellent.
Do you think that what do you think about this Brexit business? Is this just going to fly by as a news item, or is this, do you think?
Look, we're talking about an international affair, and people are talking about, oh, some people are talking about this, some people are talking about that, they're talking to different nations about that. Nonsense. The whole planet is at risk. The entirety of the planet is at risk. And what we're trying to do is not to save some part of the nation or nations, but rather to defend this national system from destroying itself. And by taking the measures which will enable that system to defend itself against the kind of folly that Obama and the British Empire represents.
Okay.
Hi, Lynn. Alvin here. I wanted to take up with you from a question that Helga responded to earlier in the week from someone who had some relationship to the organization, had been attending meetings, and was asking Helga to respond to the idea that, or the reality that he faces of being chastised through his association and through his expressing the ideas that he picks up that we're running with actively here in this organization. You know Helga's what Helga's response to this was, but we're here in Manhattan. The movement is growing, the Manhattan Project. Sylvia made some reference to it. There are things that are in the process of development where we'll be spreading into other boroughs, most especially the Bronx. And for those people that are coming to us, the whole idea of our cultural work becomes essential, because one of the responses to in Helga's response to this fellow was the idea of developing inner beauty, where you then can know truth, where you want to know truth, and then can stand up to the silly, stupid neighbors around you, and then eventually win them over because they see you're actually sane and showing some courage. So around this idea that Helga responded to, we've talked about it a lot, you've talked about it. As we continue our fight, what can you tell us more about this and our work here?
I think it's what Helga, my wife, has done in her time on this issue, and I think that the whole nation can be brought into an understanding of this process. What we have to do is lay out how the process works, and then we have to go out to work and make sure that it does work. We're getting great work from the people in the defense of the nations at various times. We're getting it. It's wonderful. But I wouldn't worry about that. I think just do it. Just present the case, identify the case, bring up the key points, and let it go.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynn, this is Daniel. And my question is on this, returning to the crimes of the Saudis and the British and the people, including Bush and Obama, who have covered this thing up. When we have discussed this, we're talking about the idea of justice for the victims of 9/11. But the very idea of justice is, it's not well understood in this culture. And so my question is, what is this justice that we're seeking, and how could we communicate that over these next 3 months as we lead up to the 15th anniversary?
I think that that's too simple in a sense, because it's a much more complicated case. The question is, how do people react to the discovery that a terrible crime is being committed by a major force in some parts of the United States and the parts of nations? That's what the issue is. You have to get to, not to the point of some issue as such, as a local issue. What you have to bring forth is what is the standard for the support of the requirements of a human being human beings in order to bring mankind into a more successful form of a realization of what mankind is. It's just that kind of simple. I can repeat it in various terms in various ways. But this is not a question of something personal in a simple way. What's here is the question of what is the issue of mankind? Einstein. Use the word Einstein. Don't try to give some other shorthand on it. What Einstein intended is exactly what you and we should intend.
I thank you for that, because just to say a little further, the the tendency. I actually had an experience about 3 weeks ago, where I went to an event with Jake Sullivan, who's Hillary Clinton's top foreign policy advisor, and I asked him this. I made it clear in the course of this event with many hundreds of people there that we need to get these 28 pages. And what happened was a member of the New York City government came up to me, and this was his question: is what do you mean? What do we have to do? Are we gonna go after the Saudis? Are we gonna go after, what are we gonna do on this? And there was no way to express it other than we have to create a human society, and once again. So it's a very I think that's a major challenge for us in the organizing right now.
Use it. It may not be the most perfect expression of the thing, but do it anyway. You need to do something quickly that's going to be useful to many people. Do it.
Hi, Lynn. It's Maria. What you addressed last week when Daniel asked his question about can genius be taught. There was a point in the discussion where you said somebody becomes a genius, and it's not becoming a genius. It's that quality of genius infects them. They have it. And then if they are smart, if they are up to living to what they should be, they will express what we call genius. And that idea really resonated with me throughout this last week, and we were getting this explosion in the field, but I think it requires not just the potential in the population, but also that we are rising to the challenge of providing that kind of real leadership, real genius leadership, like Einstein, and not being practical. So I wanted to address just this specific point that you made, that if people are up to the challenge of living to that standard, and you will talk a lot about this question of practicality. And this is what I see as I've really just been grappling with this question, maybe more also from a certain personal standpoint, but I see it in myself and in others, that when you're tested, then you see really what somebody is made of. And life brings each and every single one of us certain tests. And there's a difference between those exceptional people who rise to the challenge of those tests and take on the real challenge, emotional and intellectual challenge of leadership. And what I wanted you to address more was this emotional education, because I know I've been privileged in 15 years, especially in the youth movement, that we had certain core curriculum like Schiller, music, science. And this is a foundation for people really having this kind of emotional education, so that when they are tested with the real question of, am I going to take up leadership at all personal expense for the future of mankind? Anyway, I wanted you to really address this question of the emotional education, so that people aren't practical. So that people aren't practical. If Einstein was practical, if he had given in out of fear or something like that, if he wasn't totally gripped by these ideas, that it infected him, if he had given in any form, we wouldn't have had the great benefits of Einstein. So I think you get what I'm trying to get at, but we really have a real lack of that emotional education in people, which gives them the courage to not be practical and to be courageous.
Well, I would say let's shift the choice of character or attention at the moment, not to reject anything about it, but just to simply use a different comparison. Kraft Erica. Kraft Erica was the founder of about everything, about the moon, about almost everything. And he was faced with a disease which prevented him from actually dealing with the internal conflict, the medical where he was going to die anyway. That he had the choices, two ways to live, but what he had was two ways to die. Now, and what he has done, what he has done, delivered, and what those who follow him have done, is that. So while it seems like it's the naming of a particular person, as being a particular figure, it's not that. It's something much more general. What is the quality, looking at it from the standpoint of the Kraft Erica's history? What is so sacred about what Kraft Erica represented by the time he had died? And that says there's a higher standard of measure which defines the meaning of human. Human is not limited to a human person. It is defined in terms of humanity in general. And that's the way to look at it. It works that way.
Thank you.
Hi there.
How do you do, young lady?
Not bad. How are you? Okay.
What?
Oh. There's a little feedback. Go ahead. Nope.
I'm getting
Is
a
it audible? It looks like Lynn can't hear. How's the audio? Okay. Is this better? Yeah? No? He can't hear. It's the connection.
what?
Can I be heard now? We're working on the connection.
Are you able to hear me, Lynn?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, fine. There's a problem with the other microphone, apparently. Oh, okay, try.
Okay, I'm
we're
going to
gonna
try this again. Can I be heard now?
Yeah.
I can go to that mic.
If you can hear me now, Lynn, I think we'll switch Michelle to this microphone. Is this okay?
Okay, do it.
Okay, good. Great.
So I want to ask a question that comes up in the organizing. Helga, in her presentation to the San Francisco conference, was clear on the necessity of us presenting internationally, but also to the American people, the absolute danger represented by the war provocations, by the NATO drills being done in Eastern Europe, directly provocative to Russia. They're doing drills where you have U.S. armed forces driving from Germany up to Russia's border with the explicit intention of preparing for a Russian invasion, which Russia has not announced or, as far as I'm aware, prepared for or intended to do. So we've done that. We've had a series of deployments, like very high profile with large signs, leave NATO. We have this petition, and as I understand it, we'll continue with this initiative building into the Warsaw Conference in a couple of weeks. I wanted to bring up a question that had come up amongst some of the organizers, where you had discussed some of these war provocations as bluffs, that there's a bluff involved with these powers, and I want to see if it's a bluff, but it's still a dangerous bluff, how exactly to take this?
Right. It is a dangerous bluff. It is a dangerous bluff. The issue is, how will you deal with this bluff? And you can win. We can win. But that point is, we have to not give in. Because what's happened, look, the British system, the entire the empire, which is the, Satan incarnate, essentially. That thing can be defeated. It is being defeated. Obama is the major source of complaints on this account. Obama is the best example of pure, satanic motives himself. So the point is, the question lies not in who is going to do this and who's going to do that as such, though those things have importance. The issue is, what will the American citizen or the European citizens do in response to a satanic force like the British Empire or Obama, who is a real killer?
Thank you.
Okay, now, so Jessica will now attempt to use the other microphone. We'll see how that works.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, see.
Well.
Yay. See, I fixed it. No. Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. This is Jessica from Brooklyn. And I was in the field with Daniel and other members of our forces with the Russian group at Times Square. And as always, it's a lot of fun. It's flags and lots of colors and picture taking and everything. It's really, I enjoy it a lot. And it's always like that when we're with the Russian group. And then we fanned out to speak to the public about the relationship between, the positive relationship that has always existed between the United States and Russia. And to ask them, can they think of what do they think about Russian and American relations? Do they have any idea of the history of it, or what do they think about it now? And my question is coming up to you because as an activist in the group, I've noticed a few things talking to people. First of all, they will sometimes put you off. And the most significant person I talked to turned out to be this lovely woman who is a physician and has now joined us. She owns an island in the Caribbean, excuse me, and a small island. She called it a rock, okay? And in talking to her, the first thing she said was, Putin is insane. And I pointed out that Obama is insane. And I asked her things about the NATO provocations, and did she know about them, and did she know the history of Russia and the United States. And as I was going through the history of how Russia has never let us down, they fought with us in several wars. They gave, well, the American Revolution also, Civil War and World War II, and other situations too, and they gave us Alaska. And someone said they gave us Georgia, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah, is that right? Okay, but I said, and Obama with his British handlers are, through NATO, are provoking war, and if it's a war, it'll be a nuclear war. And then she sat and looked at me and said, you know, you're right. I said, yeah, so you agree, Obama's insane, and Putin is actually just, Putin. So she said, yeah, that's true. And as I spoke to her, another thing came up, and that was the music. So I'm finding that she said she goes to her little rock, and she comes back. She comes back to visit, but then she goes back to her little rock because she gets kind of tired of the music and the noise and all that kind of American stuff, you know. And so I told her about our music. And lo and behold, she's going to join us. She's going to come to the conference and, you know, deal with the music that we present. So I just wanted to bring up to you and say, can you give a little more insight into what Daniel was talking about and what Michelle is talking about, that truthfulness in us that comes out when we stick to the truth. And then we can find things out about people that will actually lead them to even more things like our music.
What you're bringing up okay. No, well, what you're really dealing with is the fact that there's a popular way in which people are commonly interpret social relations. But these things are really not crucial. They can be pesky, a terrible nuisance, but they are not essential to mankind. What is important is what mankind can find in mankind's own self. Now, that's not such a tough job. It is a tough job in one sense. But if mankind, the individual person, can look into themselves and find a real moral principle inside themselves, a principle on which they would enact for the purpose of supporting Manhattan, or any other part of the city or the world. And that's it. We have to, in ourselves, come to a judgment on what is right. What is right about mankind? What are the characteristics that distinguish mankind from beasts and animals and the things of that sort? And that's it. And when you can get on that, when you can look at a terrified person, and there are many terrified persons all over the world now these days, and if you can lift their faces where they can see a hope, a way of working which can lead to a solution, that's what you're really shooting for. It's not this doing this or doing that. The question is, can you yourself find in yourself the way in which to bring mankind out of the darkness?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Island.
Hey, young man.
I want to pose a two-part interrelated, two aspects interrelated. One is that you have emphasized in a series of discussions over the last days that much of your concentration is institutional change, that you're working to transform institutions. I would be grateful to the extent you want publicly to elaborate on that. But let me pose the second part, and you'll see the connection, which is that we are dealing with a population by and large which is brainwashed here, which is deeply beset by a pervasive fundamental belief that change happens electorally or congressionally or interest groups or lobbying or all of these things that Americans have been fed for a long time. And for a long time, we've not had fundamental change in the right direction in the United States. That has a great deal to do, I think, with that kind of bias, that kind of prejudice, that kind of conceit as to how political change occurs. You, on the other hand, have developed a process and a commitment to political transformation based on what you call the principle of the flank, of the strategic flank. You've referenced, for example, MacArthur. You look at the various initiatives, the Manhattan Project, the Coral work here, the 28-page question, what Keisha's doing, the Space Initiative, the Silk Road, the NATO initiative. These are flanks. And what I think would be invaluable for all of us is how you think about and generate such flanking actions as the unique basis on which historic, necessary political change occurs. Perhaps that then goes back to how you're thinking about institutional change in the immediate period ahead.
Well, the immediate thing, which is what you're going at indirectly and also directly at the same time, is the fact that if you want to understand how mankind can survive despite the kinds of evil which dominate much of the planet right now, you have to look inside yourself and find something inside yourself which is so convincing by its natural nature, not by some guess nature, but say a natural nature. Hey, wait a minute, everything I'm doing is insane. Huh? Because what I'm doing is doing something which I'm trying to get an advantage for. Huh? And I say, no, there are no such things as advantages like that. There are no advantages that exist like that. All you can get is win. Now, what do we mean by win? It means win to gain the ability to perform the functions of human development. So therefore, it's not something which is a property this, a property that. The question is what you in yourself, inside yourself, what you really embody. Do you have the ability to pick out those values which must be served for the sake of humanity as a general phenomenon? Without that, you are not armed, you are disarmed. And I think you won't have any trouble looking through that and thinking about it, because I know you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. LaRouche. This is Rick from Bergen County, New Jersey. Recently in the news, I mentioned this on Thursday night, but recently in the news, Goldman Sachs has been hooked up with a Malaysian money scandal involving a sovereign fund managed by the government of Malaysia. The scandal involves a bond issue where about $3 billion was raised and something of the order of $600 million of that issue wound up in the pocket or in the personal bank account of the Prime Minister of Malaysia. This whole thing reeks of scandal. And it doesn't seem to be coming out, and it seems that people have become very complacent about going after Wall Street firms who are flagrantly violating laws, and people seem to ignore it at this point. I was reminded of a scandal in the early 1990s where a firm named Drexel Burnham was put out of business because they were hooked up to regulatory violations of insider trading. So my question to you is, can there be is there a flanking operation, or is the strategy of winning involve restoring the rule of law? Have we lost the rule of law in the United States, i.e., are certain individuals targeted and then others are okay to violate the law, et cetera? Do you have anything to say on that?
Sure, I have a lot to say on that, but it can be said fairly simply. Because the fact, if you do things on the basis of seeking an advantage, then you have lost everything. And sooner or later, it will catch up with you, and you will wish that you had never lived when these results come in. That's the point. People who cheat, and that is cheating, it's a certain form of cheating, that commits crime. It's a crime. Because the question is, we have to develop the ability of mankind to function in a way which is necessary for mankind as a species. And if you start to trade something off in order to get an advantage from some poor fellow who's innocent fellow, that's where the problem comes. There is no advantage really to be gained by what people think of as competition. Competition is a lousy idea.
Thank you.
Should be okay. Yeah. Hi, Lynn. This is Corey. I have a question from Avneet, so I'll be reading that to you. The Indian Prime Minister recently visited D.C. and inspired Americans again, like he did 2 years ago when he spoke at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
In his congressional speech, he invoked Lincoln and emphasized that we have to be united to fight terrorism. Westinghouse now plans to build 6 nuclear power plants in India. Modi also emphasized that India is now a global leader, and he mentioned the projects in Afghanistan and Iran that India is investing in. So overall, you had a completely different, palpable environment at the Capitol Hill. What do you think of all this?
I think that there's a process underway in much of the planet among nations which wants to do the right thing, as it's so-called. That is to bring about the kind of conditions of life as prospects and as reality which are needed for humanity's existence. That's where I stand. I think there is no other choice which is competent. And what the problem has been is that we have nations which, like the British or Obama, who's an evil fellow himself, that these kinds of things, these evil forms of evil, bring down on mankind generally, but they bring down finally against mankind generally himself.
Hi, Lynn. I have another question, partly because my wife isn't here to ask this one. But you mentioned the Craw Canal, and in recent discussions, and you said something very specific about this early in the week, about how this would be if, for example, if the activity that you began 30 years ago with the Mitsubishi Corporation and associates from Japan to get this thing built, that this would change the nature of everything. And you re-emphasized that in a different way this week. I thought it might be appropriate to discuss it.
The key thing, the first thing that came is you had India. Here was India, and you're saying, well, India needs this, India needs that. You say, wait a minute, you got a neighbor right there. It's called India. And if India were to open the gates with there, what you would have, you have an immediate change in the entirety character of the water systems around the world, especially the Trans-Pacific matter. So that was there. It's been there all along. There is a tempering now to go into that, to realize that, to bring it back into reality. The way that what Japan did in that period, because Japan was resolved at first to keep the Craw Canal program going. They gave up on the idea, but the idea has always persisted. And that Craw Canal operation is probably one of the most important issues for all mankind now.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynn. How are you?
Fine.
All right. So I've been doing a lot of work to build the chorus in Brooklyn and in the area. And what I think what I'm running up against is that I do run into a lot of people who are interested in joining it, but then they'll come for a little bit and then they won't come again. Or anyway, I want to get your thoughts on how we can escalate so that we can build this up to by the time in September we have a major breakthrough.
Well, this is not a mechanical question. And the tendency is to look at this as a mechanical question. Can we convince this guy to go along with this thing? Well, that is not the way to do it. The point is that the individual of this musician, the individual musician, is the actual source of the passion which motivates creative music and creative entertainment in general. So you're not looking for a recipe, you're looking for something inside yourself. And you're trying to find out if you have inside yourself the kind of thing that will bring you and cause you to present a competent performance. There's no other solution. You have to do it.
Right, exactly. Right. Let's see it.
Is that it? Any other questions? Okay. It appears that that's all of our questions for today. I wanted to give you a report on the organizing about the Bronx, because something happened which I think you'll like. As you know, there are a lot of characters in the Bronx, and they often like to talk about the Bronx and what to do in different parts of the Bronx. Well, we did something a little different. We had a couple of, there was a Puerto Rican Day parade, and we were asked to be in the parade. But what we did was many people are concerned about this matter of Puerto Rico and the problem with the debt and this. But we impressed on people that Puerto Rico has something that no place else in the entire world has. It has an astronomical observatory, which is the biggest radio telescope in the world. Now, most of the people in the Bronx didn't know that Puerto Rico had this. And that therefore, the thing that they were complaining about, and they have many problems there, they have a solution available to them if they actually know what they have. Now, so this is, I just wanted to report this to you. People were pretty happy when they found out that they had this observatory. And there's other things we're doing with them, because Pablo Casals also made Puerto Rico his home for a period of time. They are one of the greatest classical musicians of the 20th century. So I just wanted to report that to you, because I think that approach to the Bronx and other places like it is what is the right way to approach your Einstein point. So I just wanted to report and let you know, see if you had anything to say in response to that.
I cherish your remarks.
So, anybody else? Okay, that seems to be it for the questions, Lynn. So if you'd like to make any closing remark, go ahead. If not,
I would say continue.
okay, great. Okay, see you next time.
Yeah, very good.